Is Victor Wembanyama going to be the first rookie since Will Chamberlain to win MVP? Are fans that are super excited about the Orlando Magic correct to be super excited? Does this team have what it takes? What about the Toronto Raptors? Talking about a top 5 defense. Do they have what it takes to be a top 5 defense? Because I'll tell you that a top 5 defense is one of the few requirements to be an NBA champion and an NBA contender. In today's very special live, we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff. We're going to be talking about the Toronto Raptors' big wings. We're going to be talking about Scottie Barnes, OG Anunoby, and players of this prototype across the NBA popping up and why they are so valuable. Because there is an old dying myth that in order to be the most valuable defender in the NBA, you have to protect the paint. You have to be a big, conventional paint protecting big like a Rudy Gobert. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to give you my season predictions, my standings predictions, my awards predictions, which rookies to look out for, which teams I think might be on the rise. Hint, hint, Orlando is definitely one of those teams. And ultimately what I think is going to happen this season. And then finally, towards the end of this live, we are absolutely going to talk about the media bias against the Toronto Raptors. I don't like to stoke this flame, but it is really hard to ignore. And I really want to present, I think, a unique perspective on why this exists. So first, let's hear from Raptors ascending star Scottie Barnes as our makeshift intro in terms of what he thinks can happen with the Raptors defense.
And we just got a bunch of other guys that can just be able to go 1 through 5. They're strong, physical, got that length. I think that just shows what our team can have on that defensive end. We should be top 5 in defense with all these guys with these long-ass arms. Got length, tall, strong. We should be able to just go out there and get stops any night and just impose our will on the defensive end. And we just got a bunch of other guys that can just be.
So first, let's talk about the season preview. We will get to defensive archetypes and what I think are the most valuable types of defenders. And then finally, towards the end, we will talk about what I mentioned about the media bias and how just media narratives work in the NBA. I spent a lot of time talking about it last year in a very breathy, sort of out of control way. And now that, I've had some time to think about it, I wanted to present the case in a slightly more logical and hopefully more balanced and nuanced way that people can, accept it a little bit better. So first, let's get to the season preview. Okay, now I have spent a lot of time this offseason watching not only teams and how they played in the playoffs and last season and studying data, but also I just wanted to be really, really informed about all 29 teams as best as one human being with one brain possibly can be. So I went on to forums. I listened to what people felt about their teams. I listened to podcasts about the Pistons and the Magic. And I listened to introductory pressers for new coaches around the league and what they were trying to do. I just wanted to have a more rounded, appreciation for the rest of the league and some of the players that I really like around the league and follow. So I just wanted to present my case for, I guess I just wanted to be more balanced in terms of how I talk about the other team in our post-game lives. And if you're new around this channel, definitely do subscribe. We do post-game lives after every single Raptor game. We did it last year. We're going to continue doing it this year as well. And it's a jam. All right. So let's start first with my all NBA teams. I think that's a good place to start. So my first team all NBA is Damian Lillard, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Jason Tatum, and Nikola Jokic. Then on my second team, I have Drew Holiday, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Zion Williamson. And now this is very much baked into all of my season predictions is Zion is going to have a healthy season. It's not just that I think it's good for the league that he has a healthy season, even though they have their new prized possession, Victor Wembanyama. But ultimately, I think the Pelicans are just a really good team and they really need him to be competitive. And I think it would be great to really disrupt what's happening in the West right now to have this sort of emerging, young, incredible team. And we'll talk about them when I talk about my season, my standings and why I like them so much. And then I have Joel Embiid, right? Joel Embiid and, everything that's happening in Philly right now with Nick Nurse and with James Harden potentially wanting out or definitely wanting out. On my third team, I have Donovan Mitchell, Tyrese Halliburton, Jaylen Brown. Again, this is a hot take territory already. You have 3 Celtics making, 3 All-NBA teams, and you have a 4th in Kristaps Porzingis. I don't know if this has ever happened. I don't know if the league would ever allow it, but I have a feeling the Celtics are just going to be that good that this will be acceptable. I also think that I may have to revise this at some point because I'm like, would the league allow Kristaps Porzingis? And the league likes to diversify this. So would a guy like a Julius Randle make it in over someone like a Kristaps Porzingis because the positions don't matter as much? And I didn't really factor that in too much. It's like people have a hard time adjusting. They're still going to try to add a center to that third team, but maybe it won't be Kristaps. Maybe he won't be able to put up the numbers. Certainly, if I'm wrong about one of those things that I would be willing to bet on right now, it's probably that there's no chance in hell that 4 Celtics are going to make the All-NBA first 3 teams. But I think that the two interesting wrinkles this year for All-NBA are, number one, there's a games requirement. So you have to play a certain number of games in order to qualify, which may push out guys like Anthony Davis, LeBron James, who haven't been the healthiest over the past few years. And again, putting Zion on that list is already in crazy territory, because how am I expecting Zion to play 65 games this year? I don't know. He's had a lot of rest over the last 2 years. I'll tell you that. Moving on to my all rookie teams. So my first team all rookie, no surprise, Victor Wembanyama, Chet Holmgren. I don't think there's anything surprising here. I have been lower than most on Brandon Miller, but I'm going to keep him on my first rookie team, not because of what he did the other night. Honestly, it's a small sample size. It's one game. Not overreacting to one game. I just think with how this Hornets team is structured, I think he's just going to have more opportunity than some of the other guys. Then we have Asar Thompson, the lower picked of the 2 Thompson twins, and Scoot Henderson. And on the second team, bias is off. Everyone knows in the draft cycle, I was not a huge Keontae George guy. I really didn't want the Raptors to take him, but I see him on my second team. I don't think the Jazz are necessarily going to be very good this year. They surprised a lot of teams last year, and I don't necessarily think they're going to be that good this year, but I could be wrong. Walker Kessler is a beast, but I'm not seeing it. So Keontae George, I think he'll get some minutes. Amen Thompson for the slumping and probably bottom feeding Houston Rockets. Jarris Walker, again, one of those things, right? Fit, roster, how he fits with the style they play. Will he get the opportunity? I don't know, but I think he should. And Indiana is definitely a team that I'm high on, and I think that he could be an immediate contributor for them. Derek Lively and Sasha Vezenkov. So that is my all rookie team. Now to the awards. And you'll notice, not being a Raptor homer here, right? This is a Raptors podcast. Yes, the Raptors are my favorite team. Yes. And yet we have not seen Grady Dick make an emergence here. We're not seeing Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, etc. yet. Where's my all defense? Hold on. There we go. Here is the all defensive team. And now you will finally see some Raptors on this list. All defense first team: Drew Holiday, OG Anunoby, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Evan Mobley, Jaren Jackson Jr. And on the second team, we have one of my favorite players, Derek White, Mikal Bridges, Emmanuel Quickley. Now this again might be very hot take territory. Scottie Barnes and Victor Wembanyama. Again, the qualification for games played applies to all awards and all of these all defense teams, etc. So there are some very injury prone players like Anthony Davis who have traditionally made this type of list. I don't know if they're going to make this type of list. Obviously, if Marcus Smart can do something incredible in Memphis in the absence of in the absence of Ja Morant, and they are competitive, then there's a very good case that he could make one of those teams too. I just think that there are 2 teams that are really going to dominate the conversation around defense this year, and that is the Toronto Raptors and the Boston Celtics. Okay, moving on to the actual award winners, and then we will finally talk about the standings and the individual teams. So my award winners. Okay, I reject this notion that Nikola Jokic is going to win MVP this year. It's not that I don't think he's the best player in the league. He's definitely the best player in the league. I just don't know if the Nuggets are going to be good enough to get him the award. And there's a lot of reasons for this, and we'll talk about it when we talk about the standings. But for me, my MVP is going to be Jason Tatum. The NBA loves storylines. This is a young, emerging player. He's been on the cusp of like the top 5 conversation for 3 years now. And I think this is the year that he finally breaks through and legitimizes himself in that conversation. No, he is not a perfect player, but none of these players are perfect players. I think, however, the work that he's put in this offseason, I've been warning people all offseason that ever since I heard about, some of the stuff that he was doing this offseason, I'm like, man, this guy's about to take it to another level. And if you have seen Jason Tatum over the last 2-3 years, he's already on another level. And for him to take it up even on another notch, this seems like something that's on his bucket list. And he's going to have the type of team and the type of teammates and the type of coach and the type of offensive system and defensive system that is going to get him easy buckets, easier than ever before. You're playing with probably the best third and fourth option that I've seen in a really long time in Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. You just can't gang up on him the way they have, and stopping this guy one-on-one is not possible. He's about 6'9.5". He's built like a linebacker. It's really hard. A lot of the same things that I talk about with Scottie Barnes. It's that with Jason Tatum, except less passing and way, way, way more scoring ability and refined scoring package. So he's a really unstoppable player. I think we saw it on opening night against the Knicks, and I think it's just going to continue. I think he might, end up really surprising some people with what he's capable of this year. Moving on to the winningest team, surprise, surprise, Boston Celtics. We'll talk about league parity and roster parity around the league. Coach of the year, Willie Green for the New Orleans Pelicans. Defensive player of the year, Evan Mobley, with Giannis, Anunoby, and Porzingis finishing with votes in the top 4. Again, pushing Jaren Jackson Jr. and Jaren Jackson Jr. out of this conversation is largely because I think the Grizzlies are going to struggle. And typically you don't get a lot of recognition for these awards, regardless of whether you deserve it or not. I think, Bam Adebayo and Jaren Jackson Jr. are easily better defenders than Porzingis. Honestly, I think they're probably on par, if not better than OG Anunoby as well. But again, it will come down to that. Most improved player, I expect it to be Scottie Barnes. Look, he had an awful game on opening night, and it's still, to some people, one of the best games he's ever played. And I really don't think he's even scratched the surface of where he'll be in a couple of months. So if he stays healthy, I fully expect him to win this award. Not running away, because I think he'll have some competition for it from certain players if they can stay healthy, guys like Cade or etc. But I think the storyline really favors him. And Rookie of the Year, Victor Wembanyama. I absolutely think he's going to win this award. I'm not really sure it's going to be super close. And I know the NBA would love for him to win this award because they love that their future, guys win it. As much as I think LeBron was certainly like deserving of, praise for the way he played as a rookie, especially coming out of high school. There's a lot of cases to be made that Carmelo Anthony should have won that award, but the league is going to go where the league is going to go. And it's very much lined up, right? With everything happening in the NBA right now, the global expansion, the new TV deal, the eventual expansion of 2 more teams, the midseason tournament, this ushering in of the NBA app, Victor Wembanyama coming in. This is one of those very strange periods in NBA history where they are turning a page. They turned a page with Jordan. I think they turned a page with LeBron. They're turning another page with Victor Wembanyama. And every time they have turned the page, there's been a 0 added to almost every, figure that you can imagine. So, and that's just the way the economy is going as well, right? So Victor Wembanyama is good for business right now. And, the Spurs are a stable organization. Will he stay there? He seems like the type of person who will stay there for his whole career, but who knows in this day and age, maybe someone can attract him away in 4 years. But the league is very vested. He's an international star. He joins a roster of international stars, the 2 triple doubles that were registered so far, I believe, Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic, right? So you are really tapping into so many different markets. And with Victor Wembanyama, you have such a global following for this player. And he is, we often look at league ambassadors, people who are spoken in a way and construct themselves in a way that aligns with the league's own philosophy of how they want to present themselves. LeBron, Jordan, Steph, Victor Wembanyama. This is exactly the lineage. That's exactly the player type. It's exactly the personality type. It's the type of person that you want to build a company around. And really, the NBA is a company featuring 30 teams, soon 32 teams. And ultimately, that's what they do. They were never going to build this league around Kevin Durant. They were never going to build this league around, maybe even they weren't going to build this team around someone like Nikola Jokic. I mean, they're not necessarily, probably not great for business that the face of your league is, more interested in horses than basketball. Right. So Victor Wembanyama is a basketball junkie and obsessed with basketball. And we will definitely talk about Victor more when we talk about the Spurs. Now let's go to the standings preview. Hopefully, let me know in the comments if the live is going well, if it's moving at a brisk pace for you. Black Nubian with this super chat here, man. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Way Too Smoky saying finally caught alive. Absolutely, man. Rank Scrub, thank you for the super chat. If the Raptors traded Gary Trent Jr., Chris Boucher, Thaddeus for James Harden, would we be a better team or Gary better than Harden by himself? Gary Trent Jr. is definitely not better than James Harden. I'll tell you that. He's not better than him on offense, not better than him on defense. The only argument you can make that Gary is better than James Harden, honestly, is that he is definitely better for your locker room, and he's a lower maintenance personality type, but that's not even close in terms of the players that they are. I think you can make a very legitimate case if James Harden was on your team, he would be your best player right now. Hey, Robin, Chad, hope y'all have been enjoying basketball being back. Absolutely, Erica, really enjoying it. Paradise Lost, what do you think of Nick Nurse's team last night? I think they played well. I mean, you can't win them all, and this league is just so stacked. So, as evidenced by the fact that I have the Sixers outside the playoffs. Am I the only person that has them in the play-in right now? Maybe, but that's just because I'm unusually high on two teams that are ahead of them. So let's talk about it. Eastern Conference. Let's start from the top to the bottom. And Paradise Lost, why is Chris Boucher not playing? I will actually talk about that as well when I talk about the Raptors in this segment. Okay, so right up top, Celtics, right? I mean, geez, the top six on that team are all really good. Everything beyond that is a question mark for me, right? I like Peyton Pritchard, but they have lost some depth for sure in order to create this team that they have. I wonder what happens to them if someone gets injured, especially if it's one of their three most important players. They did a lot of 2-for-1 type of deals. And look, they had an abundance of depth last year. They lost Grant Williams. I think they'll regret it. I like Grant Williams a lot. He's one of my favorite players in the NBA as well. So it's to be seen. But they have replaced them with really good guys who are talent upgrades for sure. Kristaps Porzingis is very underrated. Drew Holiday is a much better player than Marcus Smart across the board. As a defender, as an offensive player, he's better. And the internal growth of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum will eventually be like this team. What they eventually accomplish will be based on them. Damian Lillard is with the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Bucks have a new coach in Adrian Griffin, former Raptors assistant. Naturally, I am high on the Bucks, but not as high as some. And I just want to point out right now that there will be very few really bad teams and very few really good teams in the NBA this year. This is just my estimation. And based on what I'm looking around, seriously, look at the teams that are outside the play-in. And again, I could be very wrong. The Bulls, they have 2 All-Stars. The Nets, they definitely have 2 or 3 really incredible players. The Grizzlies, they have 3 All-Stars. The Jazz, they have 1 All-Star. Victor Wembanyama is on the Spurs. Really, the only 4 teams that you could say are definitively bottom are Hornets, Rockets, Wizards, and Trailblazers. And none of those teams are sorry. The Rockets have added Dylan Brooks. They have Alperen Sengun. They have Fred VanVleet. These are all NBA players. These are not teams that are just full of G League guys like the old school Bobcats, right? The Trailblazers, they're not a bad team. I mean, my God, they're very fun to watch. They have Anthony Simons. They have Jeremy Grant. They have Scoot Henderson. They have pieces, man. And right now they can surprise some people early before they trade Malcolm Brogdon. They have Malcolm Brogdon. How the hell do I have them finishing beneath? But it's like, who would they finish above? You could make a very legitimate case that if this Malcolm Brogdon thing works out for the Trailblazers, that they're finishing with like 40 wins. The question is, who are they beating for those 40 wins? Yeah, in a normal season, you'd be like, that's a 40 win team. That's a 38 win team tops, right? Jeremy Grant, really good player. Not a top guy, but he's a good player, right? You lose Damian Lillard, fine. But you got DeAndre Ayton, who is a starter. Jeremy Grant, starter. Scoot Henderson, starter. Anthony Simons, starter. How do you finish at the bottom of the West with 4 starters on your team? It's really hard for me to understand that, right? Part of it is, to be honest, leadership, veteran leadership, etc. But now you have Malcolm Brogdon. In a normal year, let's be real. Like the times when the Raptors were like winning 40 games, 42 games, 47 games in the West, if you took that Portland team just as they are now and you plucked them right into that, would they be better than some of those teams that won 45 games? Absolutely, they would be. They're very talented. But talent doesn't always win. Winning is hard in the NBA, and I think that team will struggle with winning. It's really not going to be a 10 win, 15 win type of team, though. They'll beat up on some teams. They'll catch some teams napping. They'll run, etc. They'll win some games just on talent alone, where their talent, shows up. Maybe a big game from Jeremy Grant. Maybe a career piece from DeAndre Ayton. So you'll get that. So the bottom team in the West might finish with like 27 wins, 28 wins, instead of the typical 16, 17, 20 wins. So what does that mean when you talk about the rising of the tide in terms of parity around the league? Well, if you had, let's say, for instance, just as a thought experiment, let's say every single team was the Boston Celtics. Like every single team, like we do some sort of 2K simulation, and there's 30 Jason Tatums and 30, Drew Holidays and 30 Kristaps Porzingises, and every single team is the Boston Celtics. Where would the teams finish? They would finish right around dead middle. Nobody would be able to separate at all. And that's kind of not exactly how the league is, but it's very difficult to stand apart, because at some point, in order to get 60 wins, you have to beat 60 teams. And it's really difficult when you can't find like a consistent diet of 6, 7, 8 really bad teams at the bottom. And there aren't those teams this year. Nobody is that bad, right? The only team that you can make a case for being that bad, and that's the only outlier that I think, is going to be the Washington Wizards. So let's start at the bottom. The Wizards, I do not like their roster, but they do have NBA players, right? They have, they have players, man. Like they have a good point guard now. They have some depth. DeLon Wright, I like Denny Avdia. Jordan Poole is not my favorite player, but he's definitely been, a contributor on a really good team, including a championship team. You got Kyle Kuzma. Yeah, I think I mentioned Daniel Gafford. They've got an exciting rookie in Bilal Coulibaly. How do I have this team finishing at the bottom? The question is, who are they finishing ahead of? Who are they beating? You can be a really good team. If every other team is better than you, you're going to lose. Like, you're probably going to lose 65 games. You could be a great team, but you still lose 65 games if the rest of the league is that much better. And I think right at this point, the league is just that much better. Now, the Hornets, let's see what happens with LaMelo Ball. He hasn't always had the most consistent, injury history. They have some good players. They do, right? They have Gordon Hayward. I just don't think that the maturity and the leadership and the defense is going to be there for that team, personally. The Detroit Pistons, a very interesting team, that some people are projecting could make the jump to the play-in situation. Once again, my question is, look at the top of the East. Who are they passing, right? Yes, I agree that a healthy Cade will help. Yes, I think Asar Thompson is probably not named Victor Wembanyama and Bilal Coulibaly, probably my favorite rookie in terms of just upside of guys I really believe could be good in the league. I love them. But I like Jalen Duren a lot. And by the way, I just want to give a shout out. Hornets, Mark Williams, awesome center. Jalen Duren, awesome center. James Wiseman was out of the rotation, which thank God, right? Killian Hayes is still in the rotation. Why? Right? So you have the Pistons at the bottom here, and it's like, I don't know who they're supposed to pass. I mean, they could win 37 wins and be right at the bottom there. But the question is, if they got 37 wins, then what does that do to the top, right? Because typically the third worst team in the East would have like 23 wins, 24 wins, 27 wins. They wouldn't have 30 plus wins. We entered this, it happens. When the West in the early 2000s was super dominant and you had teams with 30 something wins making the playoffs in the East, same situation. The league has changed. I will stop talking about league parity. It is just very interesting to me at this time. Moving forward, we have the Nets and the Bulls. Okay. I like a lot of players on the Nets. I think Cam Johnson is good. I think Cam Thomas is good. I love Mikal Bridges. I hope for health and prosperity and good peace for Ben Simmons. I like him as I don't hate Ben Simmons at all. I think he's a phenomenal talent. I just think his best days are somewhat behind him. And they're a well coached team. But again, the question, who are they going to be ahead of? Who are they going to be behind? I think they had a bit of a fall off last year. I think their record is very misleading because they accumulated a lot of those wins with Kyrie and KD. Kyrie is in Dallas, KD is in Phoenix. So those wins will be hard to come by. And again, Mikal Bridges came onto the scene a lot by putting up some very godly numbers. And I followed him for a really long time since college in Phoenix. He's been consistently like one of my favorite players, but he's not a top guy. And I know that people think he's going to be a top guy, but I think there's levels to this. And if your top guy is Mikal Bridges and the other team's top guy is Donovan Mitchell, you lose. And if the other team's top guy is Jason Tatum, you lose. And if it's Shea, you lose. It's not enough to just be an all-star anymore. So that's the Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Pascal Siakam conversation is like, how good are these guys? Like, are they enough to swing a quarter for you? Are they enough to swing a season for you? Are they, because there's such a gap, right? We talk parity. Where there isn't parity with the league superstars. When you talk about the top 12, 13 players, you might put one of your favorite players in the top 20 conversation, top 25 conversation. But the gap between 20 and 12 is so large, so immeasurably large. And I think that's going to make the difference between, which team comes out on top in the playoffs. But in the regular season, where it's a grind and you play deeper into the rotations, it's going to be hard for any team other than the Celtics, in my opinion, to get a lot of separation. The Bulls, they call it players only meeting. The Raptors face them tonight. It's going to be interesting, right? Nikola Vucevic. They're still without Lonzo Ball. I think that would have helped a lot. I think Patrick Williams has come along nicely, but not necessarily for a fourth overall pick. They're getting some contributions from Ayo Dosunmu, and they're definitely getting something from Kobe White, where that was not looking like the most promising trend at some point. I just wonder defensively, as good as the analytics have been on them at times, can you have an offense that is running around these three players? Right now, I know I'm saying this as you have teams above them like the Raptors and Magic, where you could make a very definitive case that those teams do not have the talent that the Bulls have or the Hawks have. So yeah, I mean, I think it'll come down to coaching, luck. There's definitely a case to be made that the Nets or the Bulls could easily be in the play-in situation. And a team like the Pacers or the Hawks or the Raptors or the Magic could completely fall out of it. I get that. We're projecting a lot here based on luck, based on growth, based on, reasonable growth expected from certain players. I think the Bulls will be outside of it. And yeah, I'm curious what they're going to do with DeMar's contract. Moving on to the Atlanta Hawks, a team that has been mired in controversy, and they made a few trades. They got rid of John Collins. Interesting team. I like their talent. Trae Young, I wonder about him as a leader. They're starting Sadiq Bey. They're not really playing AJ Griffin and Onyeka Okongwu, two of my favorite players on that team, heavy minutes. I don't know if Kobe Buffkin's going to get in the rotation. But ultimately, you go as far as your top guys go, and how bought in is Trae Young, to the defensive end and towards fitting into Quinn Snyder's, offensive system. The first, game did not look great for them. Again, a team that could easily top three. I mean, when it's almost insignificant to talk about these standings. I'm really talking about them more in groupings, right? Because when the team that is second in the conference and the team that finishes 10th are going to be separated by like 6 wins, really, you're talking about one guy missed time, one guy didn't miss time, and the team that was supposed to be 10th now is third. It's not like in normal situations. So it's very possible that that the Hawks could surprise some people. I'm just not seeing it. I don't love Clint Capella as a player. Jalen Johnson looks like he has taken a step, though. All right, moving on to the Sixers. Nick Nurse's inaugural season in Philadelphia does not go as fans expected, and it will depend a lot on the pieces that they get back for James Harden. They have a lot of faith in Paul Reed. They have a lot of faith, in someone like Tyrese Maxey, and in both those cases, I agree. I think they're both really good young players. I do wonder good how good things go when things don't go well with players like Joel Embiid. Do they sulk? Do they Joel Embiid has been on winning teams pretty much, for the last 4 or 5 years, right? Ever since he got healthy, he and Ben Simmons. And every single time the cards have been down and things have gone badly, I've always found that Joel Embiid shows you who he is. And who he is, I think, very immature and very impulsive and very childish, and those are not the people that you want leading your locker room, especially on a team coached by Nick Nurse. So I wonder if there will be an internal implosion because of all this James Harden drama. I also, I'd be remiss if I'd not say this is the second time, we are having this situation of a star just staying away from the team, refusing to play, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in fairness, James did report to Philly ahead of the road trip, and they asked him to stay home. So the Raptors will not, thankfully, see James Harden on Saturday. But I do want to say him staying away from the team and ghosting the team this way is exactly what happened with Ben Simmons. And you can say Ben Simmons is crazy, James Harden's crazy, this person's crazy, but I got to ask at some point, if the problem is consistent, the problem is you, right? So at some point, I think you have to look at guys like Daryl Morey. You have to look at the ownership and say, what are you guys doing that you have hired, honestly, in my opinion, two of the more manipulative and overrated coaches in the NBA, and Doc Rivers and now Nick Nurse. You've had constant issues. You've had a controversy, going back to Brian Colangelo with the burner account. Now there's allegations of. If it just keeps happening over and over again, you wonder, is it just at what point can you stop saying it's just dumb luck? And at what point does it become something that you have to investigate further? So I just, on a basis of talent, of course, Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid and Tobias Harris and Paul Reed and everything that they have there is certain. They have quite a bit of depth. Like it is. And Nick Nurse is not a bad coach. I think he's overrated, but I don't think he's bad. And they didn't look bad on opening night. So this is not a, doomsday prophecy for them. They very well could finish top 3, top 4. They could be a great defensive team. I don't think Nick Nurse has ever in his life had the type of paint protector that Joel Embiid could be in theory. I just wonder if he is the type of person who can unite a locker room. He came into a really bad situation in Philly. It's very different than the situation he came to in Toronto, which was a very good situation, right? Granted, he had a hand in building that situation. Of course, he had a hand in building it. He was an assistant coach, lead assistant coach, bench mob, etc., defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, whatever. He had a part in it, but he did not build it. Masai, Brian Colangelo, Tim Lewicki, Dwayne Casey. There's so many people that built that program up with him. And when he stepped into the head coaching position, he was gifted a contender for his first job. I'm sure there's a lot of reasons why Dwayne Casey was so salty that he was fired. And then, same thing with DeMar. It's like, damn, we didn't get this chance. So the question is, now the situation is almost inverted. You're not entering a team with the greatest vibes in the league and the greatest locker room in the league like the Raptors had. No, you're entering one of the most toxic work cultures in the league in terms of everything that's happened with Daryl Morey and James Harden. And it's a very, it's a big cloud over the system. So I just think those types of situations show you who your leaders are. And I'm curious who the leaders are in Philly. If it's not James, it's not Joel, and it's not Nick Nurse, who's going to step up and be the leader? Is it going to be Tobias Harris? Is it going to be Tyrese Maxey? Who is the leader on that team? I'm curious. All right, moving on. I skipped over the Heat. I think the Heat will regret, I'm not a huge Gabe Vincent guy, but he is a contributor, and he certainly played well enough to outplay Kyle Lowry. They have Tyler Hero locked into long-term money. He's no longer coming off the bench, at least initially for them started, because they lost Max Strus. losing Gabe Vincent and Max Strus, to me, the writing is on the wall here. I think they're gearing up for a rebuild, and probably I'm most curious about who they're going to rebuild around. They have two really good young pieces that I really like. Well, three young pieces that I really like in Tyler Hero, Jaime Jaquez, and Nikola Jovic. But the question then becomes, beyond that, like, are any of those guys marquee guys? Like, I know you've paid Tyler Hero like a great sum of money, 114 million, I think, over 4 years. Maybe it's not a great sum of money in the modern NBA, but I'm curious if Tyler Hero is the type of person that you feel like you can build a program around the way you did with Alonzo Mourning and Dwayne Wade and now Jimmy Butler. Because once Jimmy and Kyle get up there, and they are already up there, you will need to pass the torch on. And I don't know if Bam Adebayo is that guy. I don't know if he's necessarily the type of guy you build it around, but they have some pieces, and they are very well coached, and they're coached, in my opinion, by the best coach in the league, in Eric Spoelstra. So, they always have a puncher's chance. And last year they were in the play-in, they made it to the finals. So, they're here in the play-in, maybe they'll be in the finals. But regular season is all about, how when you prime your guys to play the big minutes. And I don't know if Kyle Lowry is the guy anymore. I don't know if the guy can play 35 minutes a night and not get hurt, So he has a lot of miles, a lot of bumps, a lot of bruises. He plays physical. It's hard. And if you lose him, like, who is the next person up? Like, you're playing Tyler Hero at the one. Like, what is your recourse, right? Like, I haven't looked at the entire depth roster, and there might be players on that bench that I'm underestimating right now. Certainly do not pretend to be a Miami Heat expert. This is not one of my teams that I did extensive diving into other than just watching them in the finals. But it was interesting to see them lose the pieces they lose and not really replace them. Okay. And finally, the Indiana Pacers. One of my favorite teams featuring one of my favorite players. In fact, a couple of my favorite players. So obviously support to Benedict Mathurin, a player that I was not super high on at the draft, felt he was very selfish, but man, he's turned my head, and he's totally turned me around. Jarris Walker, really liked him at the draft. I think Miles Turner is a good fit for him. I think Bruce Brown is very underrated, and I think the Denver Nuggets are going to miss him, because as much as you think that you can replace his production with Christian Brown or Peyton Watson or any one of their other wings that are going to come off the bench, or maybe even Julian Strawther, who looked incredible in preseason, it's very difficult for me to imagine, as much as Peyton Watson is one of my favorite young players in the league too, any of those players matching Bruce Brown's creativity and creation load. And I think that he's giving the Indiana Pacers, a team that is already rich on so many creators, yet another creator. And I think that it just makes them very good. They have Buddy Hield on the bench, probably wants out, definitely going to want out at some point. Andrew Nembhard, again, I really like Andrew Nembhard, man. So this is just a team with an abundance of playmakers and an excellent coach in Rick Carlisle, who I believe, if I'm not mistaken, just got extended. So good faith for him. Again, long time, head coach, probably got a bad shake in Dallas, but I think he's really one of the better coaches in the league. And I thought it was a great hire when they got him. And again, Tyrese, like, seriously, I know people have been sleeping on him because he wasn't as highly recruited or highly touted out of high school, but man, keep sleeping. I mean, this guy is seeing the game at a completely different level. He's giving me all sorts of Jason Kidd vibes. And yeah, my boy Leo and I have gone back 100 times about Tyrese Halliburton. He's always said, I overrate the guy. He's been saying it for a couple of years. I overrate him. I'm like, I think you're underrating him, right? I think he's really incredible. And their opening night it's a basketball clinic, man. That team is a basketball clinic. All right, moving on. The Toronto Raptors. Okay. Let's talk about the Raptors last. Let's talk about the Orlando Magic. So I will talk about the Raptors in depth when I talk about the big wings as well. Y'all been following this channel long enough, you know how I feel about the Toronto Raptors, right? But I will tell you after I'm done with the Western Conference why I feel the way I feel about the Raptors. So moving on to the Orlando Magic. Look, I am very impressed by Franz Wagner, man. I know that he didn't have the greatest night on opening night, but they have these pieces where if they can stay healthy, they caught a lot of teams sleeping last year around the midseason mark. They started to turn a corner, and everything I saw on opening night, I mean, they smacked the Houston Rockets. They made the Rockets look like a G League team towards the end. The score would show that. But to be completely frank, the Rockets are not a bad team. They're just got smacked by a team that was just on them. And look, I've had concerns about this team defensively. Who is going to be the defender in the paint? Mo Bamba did not work out. He's gone. Wendell Carter is okay, but is he enough to make up for some of their other players? I think Jalen Suggs is a really good defender, man. I think he's a really good point of attack defender, pressure defender. I think Markelle Fultz is good. I think Cole Anthony's okay, but I think Jonathan Isaac, he might just be one of my favorite players in the league as well. And if he's healthy for a full year, and again, that is really like asking for Santa Claus, right? So he may not be healthy for a full year. He's had a slew of injuries, but if that guy can stay healthy, this team is going to be surprising so many people this year because they are constructed by Jeff Weltman, ultimately in the same spirit as Masai Ujiri in terms of long wings, but their wings are so talented. Franz, Paolo, they just have such a dearth of talent. It's incredible. Markelle, I mean, you're talking all lottery picks, right? And you have Anthony Black, and then you have a guy like Jett Howard sitting at the end of the bench, who I don't think probably should have gone 11th. I think they screwed up. They should have probably picked Grady Dick. But ultimately, at the end of the day, spacing is going to be concerned for this team. But just like the Raptors, I think defense with Jonathan Isaac, if Jonathan Isaac plays, if Jonathan Isaac doesn't play, this team is not finishing in the play-in. Like, he swings it so much for me because it's a critical mass argument. Like, there's so many teams out there where Jonathan Isaac makes the difference between 2-point win, 2-point loss, right? So, and again, the difference between making the play-in or making the playoffs and being outside of it is going to be 5 wins. And I think he could swing 5 wins for you if he's healthy. So I don't know. Maybe I'll look very stupid and very wrong, but I think they're a young team on the rise for sure. Okay. The Knicks. I mean, it's not really about Julius Randle anymore. It's not really about RJ Barrett. It's not really about Mitchell Robinson. It's not really about Isaiah Hartenstein. It's just them as a team. There's something about them. Emmanuel Quickley, Quentin Grimes, like there's something there where it is like a unified unit. Wow, well spoken, Rob. It's like a unit. Like they function as a unit. They wear you down. They have a real identity. There's no one player on the team other than maybe Jalen Brunson might be their best player, but there's no one player that sticks out as, oh, that's a superstar. They just consistently have the pieces to present a lot of issues for most teams on most nights. And I think they'll be competitive, and I think they're well coached. Unless they implode from a chemistry perspective, I don't expect them to finish outside of the playoffs. Okay, the Cleveland Cavaliers. Look, Max Strus looked great on opening night, and provide some much needed spacing because they have two bigs who do not provide a lot of spacing. The Raptors can certainly relate to that. And Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland are just so dynamic, and they're so talented. And by adding shooters like, George Niang, who's, by the way, like opening day picture of George Niang is hilarious. I mean, he's always been a little bit heavy set, but it was just very strange to see an NBA player in that shape, but it works for him. Everyone doesn't have to be cut 6-pack abs and stuff, but I thought it was interesting. And I think there could be another level for Evan Mobley as an offensive player. I think as he fills out, again, this might be one of those players that just never quite evolves into the 25 point per game type of score that you want him to, and it happens. But he's already so good defensively. His instincts are so great defensively. His switchability, the way he moves his hips, it is a nightmare. And, someone asked me, like, apart from the top two teams, which is the team that you're most afraid for the Raptors to face in the playoffs? I said the Cavaliers. I know that, we had some success against them last year, but, Pascal Siakam going up against Evan Mobley is a very scary prospect with Jared Allen hanging back and being able to stand in the paint because Jakob Poeltl is there. So that to me is scary. And then, just having even if you have OG Anunoby who can do a great job on Donovan Mitchell, it still leaves Darius Garland and the spacing that a deep shooter like that can provide, especially if he's taking a jump as well and they have depth. It's a very interesting team, the Cavaliers. Okay. And then the Milwaukee Bucks and the Boston Celtics. I mean, honestly, what more is there to say, right? I think the Milwaukee Bucks will not be as good as people think they will be. Partially because I don't think that Chris Middleton is necessarily the player that people are factoring him into, and Brooks 35. So there could be injuries. Typically, there would be injuries with players that old. If they have injuries, I don't think they have a lot of depth behind those players. They did give up a lot to get Drew Holiday. And, worth noting, I never liked Grayson Allen. But again, you make these 2, 3-for-1 type swaps enough times, eventually you do run out of depth and you're leveraging, a lot of your value in your top guys. And, Damian Lillard hasn't been the healthiest player, throughout the years. And, it remains to be seen. Of course, if the team is healthy in the playoffs, they can beat anyone in a 7-game series. But we're talking just strictly regular season. I wouldn't be surprised if they finished with 48 wins. I wouldn't be surprised if they finished with 50 wins. I'd be very surprised if they finish over 52 wins, though. With the Celtics, I'd be surprised if they finish under 60 wins. So that is the gap between those two teams for me. Okay, moving on to the West. I'll try to go through the West really quickly. I very much was tempted to put the Nuggets outside of the top spot because I thought there might be some championship fatigue and, they might rest guys a little bit more. And Jamal Murray didn't necessarily look as sharp, and maybe the young guys don't make a step. But man, Nikola Jokic is just so freaking good, right? He's just so good that I think he could sleepwalk them into 55 wins. And the problem is not, that they are so good. Rather, who is better? Who is better than them in the West? Like, who can you definitively say is going to be better than the Denver Nuggets? Who can stop him, right? I mean, it's hard. The Pelicans, look, I love the New Orleans Pelicans. If I can cover any team other than the Raptors or the Spurs, it would be the Pelicans. Not because I really enjoy, all the conversations around Zion's weight. I just love their young players. Herb Jones, Trae Young, Dyson Daniels. They have so many young guys that I really believe in. And of course, it wouldn't hurt to have the old JV man, Jonas Valanciunas there, CJ McCollum, right? They have a lot of good players. And I think they added another one, Jordan Hawkins, that I loved at the draft as well. I think at some point you do get a point where these young players, Brandon Ingram, they all mature, right? And you might see that with a little bit with the San Antonio Spurs as well, with Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson, where you have these guys, they're in a losing program, they know they don't have a chance, and then they suddenly enter a year where the big guy comes in. In the case of the Spurs, it's Wemby, and in the case of the Pelicans, it's Zion. And suddenly games start to mean something else because there's an actual goal. At the end of the rainbow, there's an actual goal. And this is so important, from a psychological perspective in the NBA. I was literally talking about this with my girlfriend yesterday about what is our 20-year goal, 30-year goal, because if we don't have it, like, we can't talk definitively about, the boat that we're going to own or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, if we can't talk conclusively about the goals that we have for ourselves, it becomes the day-to-day grind becomes very hard because it's not like we're aiming at something. And so this is where I think, having a guy like Zion Williamson, yes, he's a hell of a basketball player. And on the court, his impact metrics are off the charts, like super duper star level, top 7, top 8 player in the league level. He's unstoppable. Even if he is 90% of the athlete he was 2 years ago after all these injuries, he's still unstoppable. Even if he's 80% of the athlete he's still unstoppable. There is such a polarized, like, there's such a gap between how much he'd have to lose to not be unstoppable. There are certain guys that are just this blessed. So in his early 20s, Zion Williamson at 30 will probably be washed out of the league. I mean, he's very skilled, but I don't trust that body to hold up till 30. But for the next 2-3 years, this guy's gonna be a problem. And their core of young guys are just good enough right now that they could surprise a lot of people. So I'm suspecting that in a very flattened West, that this team could emerge as like a 2-3 game winner above the rest. All right, we have the Kings, the Sacramento Kings, the team that a lot of people think are just going to fall off the face of the earth. But once again, togetherness, chemistry, these things matter. When you do things the right way, and Vivek Ranadive has a lot of experience doing things the wrong way in Sacramento, but he's finally gotten something right, and he's brought in the right people. And that starts with Coach Brown. It starts with Jordi Fernandez. It starts with the coaching staff and development staff. Then it goes to rookies last year, like Keegan Murray, having pros like Davion Mitchell. My bad. Not the greatest player, probably not the right pick at the time, but character-wise, these are all really high character players, all high character people. You have shooting, you have a system that works, you have the personnel to run it. It's not easy to stop for most teams. Most teams simply cannot score enough to stop you on a night-to-night basis. Do I think they have, somewhat of an emerging star, call him superstar, emerging superstar in De'Aaron Fox. I think what he did in the fourth quarters last year was pretty incredible. I think the pieces around him fit. Sometimes you talk about fit. What might a player be in a different situation? I think De'Aaron Fox is finding out what he would be in his ideal situation. The screeners, the shooters, the space, the driving lanes, everything that a player like that needs is there in. If there was an optimization score between roster and playstyle, I think the Kings would get 100 points for that right off the bat. So I don't think that, everyone's talking about the Kings, so they're going to suddenly suck because everyone's going to prepare for them. No, people were preparing them for most of last year. And I think that sometimes these standings and predictions have way, way, way too much leaning into what happened in the playoffs last year. Oh, the Lakers outperformed in the playoffs despite being a really bad team for the most of the year. Well, then they must be a top 3 seed. I don't think that it works that way. There are a lot of teams that surprise in the playoffs and then fizzle out and do nothing for the next 2 years. So I have the Kings. Then I have the Suns, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Yusuf Nurkic, Yuta Watanabe. They have a lot of interesting pieces that people don't talk about. Josh Okogie. I could easily see the Suns finish top 3, top 2, 60 wins. I mean, there's nothing stopping them. I mean, that trade for DeAndre Ayton totally swung it for me because I think DeAndre Ayton is hella overrated. And Yusuf Nurkic is by no means my favorite center, but I don't think he's much of a downgrade over DeAndre Ayton in terms of the actual impact that he brings to you on the basketball court. I think very importantly, they brought it up on the broadcast on opening night, which was that Yusuf Nurkic was not trying to be a star. DeAndre Ayton was still trying to be a star. He calls himself dominating, whatever, even though he is a very consistently average center in the NBA, he still fancies himself as first overall pick, hype, etc. I need more touches, ta-la-la. Well, look, man, on a team with Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant, if those guys are healthy, you're not getting touches. Like you are a garbage man. And that's not rude. That's not shade. It's just those guys are that much more offensively talented and dynamic and efficient in terms of just what they can do with the basketball. And if you're willing to do the Derek Lively thing that he did on opening night, where you're just able to eat off of that and get your 20 points and have no ego, it's great. Yusuf Nurkic can do that. He can also space the floor a little bit. He's also, I think, a better passer than him. And, you have Josh Okogie, you have Gary Payton II, you have, Yuta Watanabe, you have some depth there. And look, if there is one team that I think definitely needs to sign Jeff Doughton, it is that team. I really do believe that. I believe they also have Eric Gordon. I mean, I'm not saying they're stacked. They're not stacked. But the pieces they have around their core 3 work very well. So I'm very curious to see how they'll do. And of course, Kevin Durant, lifelong, one of my favorite players. So I'm excited to see. The Clippers, will they or will they not stay healthy? Moving on. There's not much else to talk about with them. Bones Highland was a decent addition for them. I think, Kawhi has lost a step, man. He's still one of the top 15 best players in the league, but the top 5 that they signed. See, when the Clippers brought this duo together, they believed that they were getting 2 of the top 5 to 7 players in the NBA, with arguably the best player in the NBA coming to the Clippers. It was a really big deal. This whole thing, building an entire future around 2 players, it really does work when those 2 guys are top 10 guys, right? It totally works if it's Giannis and, Damian Lillard. But once you start edging up from, peak Kawhi, and you also factor in the number of games he and Paul George may miss throughout the year, you start asking yourself, in terms of value over a season, is Kawhi Leonard giving me more value on an average season than Jalen Brunson right now? On an average season. Not on his best game, not on his best week, not on his best month. I'm saying on an average season. Okay, if he's giving you more value than Jalen Brunson, is he giving you more value than Jaylen Brown? Like barely. It's just on the cusp, right? So when he was a top 4 player, it didn't matter that he missed 20 games. But if you're top 15, top 20 player, and when you start losing that top 10 status, now it suddenly really starts to matter because you're still eating up that much contract for your team. And I think I think we're not too far removed from this concept of like maybe Paul George. I don't know which of those guys are the guy because honestly, they're both in their 30s. And at this point, sorry, I'm getting a call here. No. Um, so yeah, I'm just curious about the depth. I think the Russell Westbrook thing is kind of doomed to fail, as many of these things are. But the vibes seem to be good. So maybe they are finally in for a year where they surprise. And then the Thunder, the insurgent Thunder behind the long wings and their inverted pick and rolls and their stretch bigs and their funky lineups. And they are very interesting. I like Isaiah Joe. I like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. Obviously, Jalen Williams was a huge, huge I believe J Will, J Dub, both of them actually. The one out of Santa Clara. Really interesting players. I think they're building for the modern NBA. I think they're really able to space you out. I don't think most teams are going to be able to deal with their speed and the cross matching ability. How they can literally set you up from the side, they can set you up from the top. They can have ball handlers at every single position. It's such an uncomfortable roster to face, right? And then now when you add Chet Holmgren to that, it makes it even worse somehow. I'm saying it makes it better for them. It makes it worse for the team trying to match up with them. It's just, what do you take away? Who do you take it away from? And the next play, it's somebody else, So this kind of offense, and we haven't even really talked about Ousmane Dieng and guys on the depth, of their rotations who could still pop for them and emerge. It's really an embarrassment of riches in terms of young assets that Sam Presti has accumulated. But I think they are ready now to stop tanking and to finally give that OKC crowd like something to really cheer about, especially because the next draft is not something worth tanking for. So if finally something has prompted Sam Presti's mind away from the draft and assets and accumulation. And as I say this, probably some player on their roster is going to get traded for like 6 draft picks or something like that. So maybe, what do I know? But I think they're finally ready to put it together. And you know what? If I woke up 4 months from now and you told me the OKC Thunder are the number 2 team in the West, I wouldn't be surprised. If you told me they were the number 14 team in the West, I would assume that somebody got really, really injured and missed a ton of time. I just think they're too good to finish outside of the top 8. Maybe top 6 is too generous, because they're leapfrogging some teams that have some really, really big stars that are ascending. But yeah, the Lakers, I just don't trust them to stay healthy. That's it. Like really, that's all it is. It's not a talent argument. I believe in their talent. I think LeBron is still a hell of a player. I can't believe I have to debate this at this point. He's so amazing as a player, but his value right now is about a third of what it was in his peak years in Miami. That's still a hell of a player, because peak LeBron in Miami and peak LeBron in Cleveland was like, seriously up there for the greatest players of all time, if not the greatest player, second greatest player of all time. But this version of LeBron is less efficient. He plays fewer minutes. He plays fewer games in the season. And, I don't trust like D'Angelo Russell and, Austin Reeves. I mean, these guys are guys. Like, they're not stars to me. I know a lot has been made about Austin Reeves because of his emergence in the playoffs. Yeah, I think he's a starting 2 guard in the NBA. Congratulations, but I don't think he's a star. And I'm very, I guess, happy for the Lakers they didn't pay him like one. But I think people get really hyped. I'm not going to go into why they get hyped, but chill on him until we see more, right? The Minnesota Timberwolves, the team the Raptors faced. Look, I think this is considered underperforming for them. I just think they would underperform. They're underperforming relative to the strengths of their roster because their pieces don't fit very well. I mean, they have had a tremendous, let's call it, breakout from Jaden McDaniels. They've had it looks like a more engaged and hopefully more bought in Rudy Gay. Hopefully any beef that was there between him and Anthony Edwards is completely squashed at this point. I don't doubt that, this team is fully capable, of having a 55 win season. I doubt it though. I have my doubts. I have serious doubts that they are going to be able to beat consistently some of those other teams. They are, however, beastly in terms of defense. I wonder if at some point, if things continue to go badly for them, if they would not be much wiser off to basically trade Karl-Anthony Towns for a piece that fits a little bit better. Maybe a wing, maybe a guard. I like Mike Conley a lot too. Again, it's very hard to imagine a team with this much talent finishing at the bottom, especially given how they ended up last year. But I'm just, again, who are they better than? Who are they supposed to leapfrog is the question that I have for all of these teams. The Mavericks and the Warriors, okay, this is hot take territory, right? Because the Warriors were really good last year, and I have them finishing this low. And I think, primarily this just has to do with the decline of Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, right? Steph Curry is still a really, really good player. Secrets out of the bag. He's amazing. And he's probably still got a year or so of core left in him. Chris Paul is a really good player. I don't necessarily like this smallish lineup they played at times. It's difficult to judge them without Draymond because he makes such a difference. But it's also difficult to judge Draymond because he's so weird. He's such a weird player, right? On the one hand, he can't shoot, he can't do this, he's slowing down, defensive impact is not necessarily the same, but isn't it? He's just one of those guys. Like, he's so smart on the basketball court. He can move your entire defense around. He can quarterback it. He makes them better. I just think what used to make them go isn't there anymore. I mean, you lose Jordan Poole, fine. You thought you didn't need him. You wanted to move on from him. You move on from James Wiseman. You invest, double down on Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody, and you think those guys are going to be the guys. And Jonathan Kuminga, for the most part, looks like he has definitely taken a step under the tutelage of Chris Paul. But I think this team is like, Andrew Wiggins does not look right to me. And that's just, maybe I'm reading something into it. Maybe it's 2-3 games that I've watched of him recently. It hasn't looked completely there for me. And if he's not giving you like first team all defense, borderline all-star production, then I don't think you have enough in him and Kuminga to make up for how much I think Klay Thompson may have fallen off over the last 3-4 years. So that's not to say they won't win, 45 games. They certainly could win 45 games, but it's very possible in the West to win 45 or 43 games and still end up 10th. So again, it's hard. The Mavericks, I really like Derek Lively. I think Luka and Kyrie are pretty slept on as a duo. I think they can definitely work. I don't think the fact that they lost so much last year had as much to do with them as it did with the role players around them. Very happy to see Christian Wood not on that team anymore. That's great. He's now on the Lakers. I don't know. I think the pieces fit a little bit better this year. I think they're hungry, and I think they're going to be a hell of a play-in out for whoever has to face them. The Grizzlies, really hard to put a team with four of my favorite players, in the entire league this low. Loved Kenny Lofton, loved Jaren Jackson, loved Ja Morant, and it's just really hard to imagine again how you weather the storm of being without Ja. And again, they've been really good without Ja, right? So this is probably the stupidest thing I've said in this entire live so far. And there's probably a chance they could be top 2. But it's not just like you're without Ja. Like you've added Marcus Smart, you've lost some critical depth pieces here, and you've lost Steven Adams, who I think is really important. And you lost him for the whole year. And I don't know if this Ja thing is resolved after this 25-game suspension or if it continues to linger to be an issue. But again, everything comes down to critical mass, right? And at some point, you're going to hit a level that you cannot get past in terms of the ability to weather a storm. And if this is the type of storm that you cannot get past, then you're going to sink in the standings. And again, this is not shade on the Memphis Grizzlies. You could easily have them finishing with 40 wins and end up right here. The Utah Jazz, Lauri Markkanen is a really good young player. Walker Kessler is a really good young player. I'm not seeing what on that roster I'm supposed to be, gung-ho about. And again, who are they better than? It's going to consistently be the question. The Spurs. The Spurs were really bad defensively last year. I think Victor Wembanyama could turn that around almost single-handedly. He does so much to cover space and cover up mistakes for other players. Keldon Johnson and Devin Vassell were not great last year when they shared the court together. In terms of their analytical impact was not incredible. And I'm curious if this Jeremy Sohan thing at guard will work long term. It certainly could with a player like Victor Wembanyama. This could actually be revolutionary in how they're thinking about this. So I'm curious, but to have them jump into the play-in situation or even the playoffs, my gosh, some people have picked them as high as 5 or 6 because they think he's going to be so generational. And so, look, he is generational. He's absolutely generational. He's very impactful. He's very skilled. But the people saying he's a top 5 most skilled guy in the NBA, I mean, maybe he's gotten so much better over the last 6 months. But chill on that, Paul Pierce, because I can tell you, I watched a lot of his full games last year, and I did not see a player who was like, if you put one of the top 5 most skilled NBA players into that league that he was in, I mean, my God, like you could make a very legitimate case that they would be dropping 60, 70 points a game. So it like you put Luka, like Luka's probably one of the top 5 most skilled. Kyrie, you put those guys against inferior competition, you see how quickly they put up 60 points. I mean, Victor Wembanyama is not putting up 60 points a game. So it's not to say that he's not. I think I was asking the other live, where would I put him? I think I said he's one of the top 80-ish players in the league, and that's as high as I'm going to go. I think being one of the top 100 players in the NBA as a rookie is very much almost unheard of. It's really difficult. There's just a lot of talent in the NBA that has had a lot of experience, and it's difficult when you are big especially big because you're going up against guys who've had, a decade more in the weight room, and they're just able to push you around. He just has such magnificent gifts that, I can understand why people are so wow about him, right? Because his release is like a foot higher than where you usually used to contesting. So it's like, okay, how am I supposed to stop this guy's shot? I don't know. And I'm not denying that in 2-3 years, it might be curtains for the league, and this guy might win 3-4, defensive player of the years, 5-6 championships, 3-4 MVPs. No doubt. He has every bit that level of upside. I don't think this roster right now is ready for contention or making serious noise in the playoffs. I think they're going to have a lot of growing pains, but I think they're going to be a lot better than last year. The Rockets and the Trailblazers. I've talked about the Trailblazers already, so I won't talk about them, but I will talk about the Houston Rockets. Fred VanVleet, Alperen Sengun, Dylan Brooks, Jabari Smith. We can make a case that all of those guys would play rotation minutes on most teams, right? Jalen Green, to me, is an issue. Kevin Porter Jr. has been, I believe, kicked off the team I believe he's kicked off the team. Please someone correct me if I'm wrong on that. It's difficult, right, for me to really think about this team seriously, because while I understand that Magic are not better than the Raptors, that's ridiculous. It's not that ridiculous, but okay. Sorry, and thank you so much. Grant Williams, the hell of a pickup for Dallas as well. And ESPN, yes. Yes, he was traded. You know what, Raptor Truth Teller? I think this might be the first comment of yours that I actually agree with. So kudos on that. I think I actually agree with you. Anyways, so they have like 5 to 6 guys who would probably get rotation minutes in the NBA, but none of them are stars. And I think my major issue is largely with this concept of building an offense around the players that they're choosing to build their offense around, because I think they're all very, very inefficient. Last year, I think Basketball Forever released something, it was a graphic which made the rounds on Raptors Reddit and Twitter, called the All Brick Team, in which featured Fred VanVleet. But you know what else it featured? Dylan Brooks. You know who else it featured? Jabari Smith Jr. There's 3 players from the All Brick Team on the same team in the same starting lineup. What are you expecting to happen here, right? And then on top of that, you have another player who probably should be on the All Brick Team in Jalen Green, who is no one's definition of efficient at all. So it's like you got 4 of those guys, and then you got Alperen Sengun. I don't think you're going to be good enough defensively to make up for everything that you're going to give up in terms of offensive efficiency. I do think that Fred VanVleet has lost a step defensively, and I'll make a very interesting case to correct a stance on Fred and Dennis Schroeder that I've been making for the last month and a half. And yeah, I just don't think they're going to be that good. I believe in Ime Udoka as a coach, but please do not ignore the fact that, yes, he's a good coach. But he's not Phil Jackson. He got a lot of hype because in his first year, when people can't associate you with losing, like your very first year, you're coaching, wow, and you went to the finals. And it's like, okay, question. If Brad Stevens was coaching on the team, would they have made it to the finals? Probably, right? It's a margin, right? It's right on the margin, right? So when you're coaching a team that talented, it's very difficult to say, well, it's because of the coach. And when you're coaching a team that's already been together for like 3-4 years, it's the same thing with Nick Nurse, right? How many coaches in the NBA could have coached that Raptors team to a championship? Probably at least 8, 9, 10, maybe 11. But only one got a championship ring that year. So it's the same thing with Ime Udoka. There's a lot of coaches probably who could have coached that Celtics team to a championship, but he's the one who did it. He's the one who got the praise, and he was in the news cycle because of Nia Long. He's also very well spoken. There's a lot of reasons why you might have delusional confidence in what he can do. I certainly have had at times delusional confidence in what he's capable of. But at the end of the day, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks have been inefficient pretty much their entire careers. It's just who they are. They've been that way at every level. So I don't think you're going to change that. I don't think you have enough around them. And while I understand and respect what the Rockets are at least trying to do by giving these young cats, veteran role models, I wish those veteran role models looked more like Garrett Temple and Thaddeus Young than Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks. I don't understand that. Moving on. Let's talk about the Raptors. Look, I looked a little bit at the data from the opening night, against the Minnesota Timberwolves. And it was very interesting. One thing that stuck out was the Raptors were horrible in the half court, right? Their half court offense was atrocious. It was worse than it was last year under Nurse. And I think there's some very clear reasons for that. But their defense and their transition game was beast mode next level. To their transition, I credit, largely all the players, but of course I credit most the guy who was pushing the break on every turn, which is Scottie, right? Every single time he could, he was shoving it down the Minnesota Timberwolves' neck because he probably just knew going in that this was the only way they were going to win the game, playing the way they were playing and shooting the way they were shooting. I mean, you simply not going to be able to get away with getting 5 points from Gary Trent Jr. and the type of performance they got from Pascal Siakam. You cannot bank on Dennis Schroeder shooting the way he shot on most nights. I promise you that. But one thing I'll say about that defense, and this is going to lead right into the next conversation we're going to have about wing defenders versus guard defenders versus big defenders, is that as much as the analytics and my own data and my own eyes tell me that Fred VanVleet is a better defender than Dennis Schroeder, what I am observing now is that basketball is a game of 5-on-5, and that with the other 4 defenders that the Raptors have, Dennis Schroeder is a better fit for the Raptors defense. Okay. What do I mean by this? I mean that if you could take Fred VanVleet and Dennis Schroeder and throw them on 29 teams, and every one of those 29 teams got their own carbon copy of Fred and Dennis Schroeder, most coaches would prefer to play Fred over Schroeder on defense. Okay. Almost every one of them. But the one that shouldn't, who probably still would because of politics, but shouldn't, is Darko Rajakovic. There's something that Dennis Schroeder does that complements what the other guys do very well. He pressures at the point of attack, and he picks up really high, which allows these gigantic roaming wings, whether you're talking Scottie, Pascal, they're all technically wings, And you can call Pascal a big, you can call Scottie a guard, you can call OG a swing forward, you can call Jalen McDaniels, you can call Precious Achiuwa a center. Technically, they're all interchangeable pieces, and they work just like that, right? Like interchangeable pieces. And if you're a chess fan, it's almost like they are all rooks. That's how I would best describe it. They all have the capability of a rook. There may not be any kings and queens on this team, but there's a lot of freaking rooks. And if I'm speaking to 144 people who've never played chess before, please let me know in the comments. So I will just stop with the chess analogy. But That's what it reminds me of. And so, in order to complement a rook, sometimes the best piece is not a bishop, but rather a knight. And it's not to say that a single bishop is ever, like people say bishops are more valuable than knights in a general sense in chess philosophy. But actually, in the case of if you had this many, flip it. In the case of having this many rooks, the single colored bishop would be, in my opinion, the most important piece. Most people assume that if you have a bishop pair, the bishops become very powerful. But if you lose one bishop, it's actually less powerful and you should prefer the knight. It depends on the other pieces though, right? Like it's always about pairings on defense. And that's it. And on offense, quite frankly, if you have a dominant post scorer, put some shooters around them. If you have LeBron James, put shooters around. If you have Steph Curry, you got to put some screeners around him. So this is how everything works. So the Raptors played into their strengths. They have, in my opinion, one of the best defenders in the NBA in OG Anunoby. They have an interesting defender in Scottie Barnes. I'm not ready to call him one of the best defenders in the NBA. I know he's spent a lot of time calling himself one of the best defenders in the NBA, and I appreciate the confidence, but I don't think he's one of the top 10 defenders in the NBA, so I'm not ready to label him that right now. And, Pascal Siakam, who has every bit of potential to be just as dominant as those guys defensively. And then you have Jakob Poeltl, who can protect the paint. So when those are your four pieces, what is your fifth piece that you desperately need? You need pressure. You need pressure and you need it high so that all of these wings can be activated the way that they are being activated. And I think that is really what it comes down to, right? If you can consider Jakob at the back end of your defense as like a knight, right? He kind of moves in that sort of plodding knight way. He's never going to get more than 2 squares away from his piece. It's a very predictable thing, but it's a good piece to have. It's not a pawn. It's not, useless. And then you have these rooks everywhere flanking the knight. And then right up top, you have this like perfect bishop. And that's your Dennis Schroeder. Someone's going to clip this as the worst chess analogy in the history of the internet, but I hope it made sense to somebody. Ultimately, I think Dennis Schroeder really fits the Raptors, and I said it a couple of lives ago that I think this could be a top 5 defense, and I'm very happy to hear Scottie Barnes saying this can be a top 5 defense, Jakob Poeltl saying this could be one of the better defenses, and it's going to have to be because, god damn it, the offense is really bad right now. I don't expect it to stay this bad. If this team ever figures it out offensively, so I've made some comparisons to the Sacramento Kings, could they figure out the vibes and the movement? They don't have the personnel of the Sacramento Kings. They don't have a single guard who's as efficient finishing in the paint as De'Aaron Fox. They don't have a single big, no matter what Darko Rajakovic says about Jakob Poeltl's potential. He's not as talented or as offensively gifted as Domantas Sabonis. And you don't have, you don't have your Keegan Murrays and Harrison Barnes and your personnel is different. So you could eventually work towards that at some point. It's hard, though, to work towards that. How do you replace a Pascal Siakam defensively without losing all of your edge? So I think that this team is going to be just fine with their top 5 defensive status and top 18 offensive status. That's a playoff team. A top 5 defense and a top 18 offense is a playoff team. Now, a top 5 defense and a top 5 offense is a championship contender and probably a likely champion. So what can the Raptors do really to get their offense from where it is right now to where it could be? Well, the same theory that you did, swapping Fred for Dennis Schroeder, a guy who fits better defensively, even though he's slightly worse, you may have to do the same thing with a player like Pascal Siakam. Now, again, I don't want to turn this into a trade Pascal Siakam for scraps thing. We are all in the vibrating, he's, he and Scottie are going to be great dynamic duo. Fine. Okay. Like live in that bubble. And if it works out, I will be the happiest person in the world and I'll be happy to eat crow. But, for one game and for most of the preseason, it didn't look great. It looked great when he was being passive, but he is your max player. So whereas initially I thought he was being, passive to settle other players up, he then comes out in, the first game and it didn't look good. It did not look good at all. And you would think that a player with his advantages and his advanced scoring skill set, because he's definitely the best scorer by far, Pascal Siakam's the most skilled scorer, and this matchup actually favors him very much. Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert and Kyle Anderson, like this is easy money. Like they should have no chance of guarding him. And he did not play well at all. I think his defense has been encouraging. I've liked the fact that he's not pressing, but at the same time, this is goes back to the question I brought up last year: is how good are we talking about? Because people have said top 5, and I don't see that level of talent. I've never seen that level of talent in him. And then people say, well, top 20, and I'm like, I'm not seeing that level of production right now. So if he settles into like a top 30, top 35 type player, right, which is more like in the Chris Middleton, prime Chris Middleton, Rip Hamilton, maybe I'm comparing him to the wrong player type. If he settles into that type of player, well, then I don't know if you have enough talent and scoring to make up for it. If he tries to be like superstar Siakam, I don't think you can be efficient enough either. You're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, because in order for him to play the way that maybe his biggest fans want him to play, he needs different pieces around him. In order for the team to play the way I think most fans want the team to play, he can't play the way he wants to play. He typically wants to play. And I think you saw a little bit of that in the first game. You know, there was a little bit of holding onto the basketball a little too long, maybe being a little bit tentative. I love the fact that he took the threes that were open and that the offense generated. But there were a couple of times where he kind of drove into the paint and, you know, waited too long and surveyed. So I'm hopeful that this is just a result of, you know, breaking some old patterns and breaking some old habits, and that eventually he will get to a point where some of those reads will be a little bit more automatic and with film study, and maybe he wasn't getting this level of tutelage from Nick Nurse, and Nick Nurse wasn't talking about this philosophy. And in theory it should work, but again, in theory you need shooters around him. I like the fact that they staggered Barnes and Siakam's minutes, but you know, for me, as much as I wanted to give Scottie the player of the game last game, it's clear as day who the best player on this team was in game 1. And I think you could make a very real case that he might be the best player on this team, period. And that's OG Anunoby, right? Maybe not the guy with the highest upside. Certainly that's Barnes. Maybe not the guy with the highest scoring output and scoring talent. That's certainly Siakam. But if you take the best of all worlds and both worlds, and if you add sprinkle in a dose of good luck for health, very difficult for me to make a case against OG Anunoby being the best player on this team right now. His defensive impact is obviously next level. So I want to take now this moment to depart from my talk about the Raptors and talk about specific Raptors, namely the Wings, and to challenge this notion of why a big is not the most important position on the basketball court. Necessarily. It can be. It doesn't have to be, though. The way basketball has been played for years, and I'm talking years. And actually, would you guys mind if we take a 2-minute break? I need to drink some water, and I forgot to turn monetization on the YouTube thing, and I would like to do that. So I'm just going to put a graphic on, and I'll see you guys in 2 minutes. I just received my mortgage renewal this morning, and it's like it's in the back of my mind. I'm like, my God, bro, you need to change your entire concept of money right now, because this country is like going crazy. Like, let me know in the comments if you've received a mortgage renewal in the last, you know, like year and a half. It's bananas. Like, I'm almost like kicking myself that 2.5 years ago I didn't try to lock myself into a 5-year mortgage, because I assumed it was coming. But it's crazy, like the financial situation that a lot of people are in right now. So I forgot to turn monetization on this video, and I know that this video is probably going to generate like $20 at the end of the day. But yo, man, like whatever, $20, right? So I'll see you guys in 2 minutes, and we are going to talk about the Raptors' big wings. Okay, see you guys in 20. See you in 2 minutes. Okay, and we are back. Sorry about that. I just wanted to turn monetization on this video. Okay, so for as long as I can remember, growing up, you heard the best defender in the NBA is Bill Russell, or was Bill Russell, or it's now David Robinson, or it's Tim Duncan, or it's Shaq, or it's Hakeem. It's always been a guy closer to the paint. Why? Why do teams prioritize these guys over someone like Sidney Moncrief? Why have guards so seldom won Defensive Player of the Year? And why do voters so consistently give the vote to the bigger players who are protecting the paint? Why do guys like Giannis have an easier time winning Defensive Player of the Year than guys like Drew Holiday, who, in my opinion, is a better defender than him in so many ways? Well, I think it's because we don't have a really easy way to measure defense. I think that's probably the most important thing, right? It's very easy right now. In 2000, if I asked you who was the best scorer in the NBA, I think a very common answer would have been Allen Iverson, right? Now, of course, that was not actually honest. That was not an honest thing. He was the most volume scorer, the most prolific scorer. He was definitely not the best scorer in the NBA. If you ask someone who's the best shooter, it's simply, in the early 2000s, it was like, who got the most threes this year? Boom, that's the best shooter. But that's just not how we measure things today. And we certainly don't look at just 3-point shooting percentage. We look at 3-point shooting attempt rate. I think the offensive analytics in the NBA have just... thank you so much, Erica. Appreciate it. Housing market is insane. I agree. Okay, so sorry, I've lost my train of thought. What was I saying? Offensive analytics have taken such a leap past defensive analytics. And so the way that we can talk about offense is so evolved compared to the way we talk about defense. And because, fans are thirsty for some sort of analytical, let's call it mirror flip side of the offensive analytic, there's always going to be a defensive Darko or a defensive Raptor or whatever. But the truth is, if you talk to anybody who works with these numbers or works with numbers in general, they would tell you there are so many issues with them and that we have so far to go. And I'm not necessarily sure what the silver lining is here or where to tell you, okay, well, this is the gap, this is the gap, this is the gap, and it'll be fixed by 2030. It's very difficult to measure defense and defensive impact because we don't necessarily have a clear way to talk about defense or what is valuable in defense. Is paint protection? What is the value, for instance, of a shot block? A blocked shot. What's the value of a defensive rebound? Okay, well, what if you block a three on a really bad shooter? Think about that. Think about that for a second. Let's say, Jakob Poeltl is about to take a three because it's the end of the shot clock and you block the shot. Like, what have you really registered in terms of a defensive contribution to your team, right? Let's say there's an uncontested rebound and you grab it, defensive rebound. Okay, what have you really accomplished here if the guy right next to you could have grabbed the exact same rebound, right? So we try to talk about, contested rebounds or, high value blocks. Like, it's just so in its infancy. But one thing I think consistently goes unnoticed is the quality of the player and the quality of the role you're consistently asked to play, right? So B-Ball Index, I believe, tried to measure this out last year, and they calculated that OG Anunoby had the toughest matchup on a nightly basis, right? That routinely he was the team's not only their best defender in terms of just raw output, but also he was being asked to do the hardest thing. So then the question becomes, well, how do you rate someone's role difficulty versus how well they perform in that role? So let's say, for instance, I had a lot of, really great defenders, and I decided that OG Anunoby would be best used as a rover in my defense, that I just wanted him to roam the way Scottie was roaming last game or the way Giannis has roamed for a few years. And in order to conserve him, I would basically make him more of a rover on defense, so like a pressure release. So I would have Gary and Fred kind of pressuring on the ball, which they couldn't really do very well. And then I have OG gapping those passing lanes for those steals. I think you can make a very, very reasonable case that OG Anunoby could break some sort of world record for most steals in a season if he were put in that type of role. So why has he not been put in that type of role? Because of the four defenders around him. No one can do what he can do as well as he can do it. But the funny thing is, OG Anunoby can do everything on defense better than everyone on his team. I think with the exception maybe of post defense, with that edge going to Jakob Poeltl just because of experience, size, length, etc. But apart from post defense, I think on every single matchup, your best bet is OG Anunoby. Your best every single type of role you could imagine within your scheme, you would basically, if you had 5 OG Anunobys, you'd be the best defensive team of all time, in my opinion. There's no weakness there. If you put him on a point guard, that point guard is going to struggle. I think the last game, OG Anunoby was 3 for 19. Like, players were 3 for 19 when going against him. He's so smart. His instincts are so perfect defensively. He moves his feet really well. His anticipation is next level. His focus is next level. He's built like a brick shithouse, man. Like, he cannot be moved off his spot. He doesn't foul very much for the type of physical defense he plays. He doesn't foul very much. So he's managed to just, he's figuring it out. Like, you were on a roll, but I'm having difficulty understanding this argument. Well, what are you having difficulty understanding? Okay. Help me understand what you're having trouble understanding so that I can hopefully explain it better. What I'm trying to say is that you could rig a defensive system to work better for OG or better for your team, but it would very much depend on the other players at your disposal, how well either of those situations would work, right? So, for instance, if you put a paint protector behind a very aggressive point of attack defender, then the point of attack defender can be much closer. They can take gambles and steals knowing that someone like a Bam Adebayo is behind them. But if what's behind them is Pascal Siakam or Khem Birch, it's a completely different equation. They can't be nearly as aggressive. It's the same thing when people were making arguments for Gary Trent Jr. being such a dominant defender because he's picking up so many steals. Yes, he's picking up steals because OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam and Scottie Barnes are doing so many good things to create the types of, like, consider two. Oh, how you judge a defensive player. Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to lay out the complexity of why it's so hard to judge a defensive player. So if you'll bear with me for a second, I just want to explain that out first. It's just, how do you compare certain events on the court? Let me give you an example. A shot block, right? Like, the type of block, right? Like, how versus a block attempt, right? So how do you judge a shot blocked out of bounds versus a shot nearly blocked where the presence of the attempt created such an overshot for the offensive player that they airballed the layup, right? Now, one is a miss, one is a block. Most analytic models would probably chart the block as the more valuable thing. But in one case, you have forced the offense into, a very, very tough, terrible shot, and you're probably not getting enough credit for it. On the other side, you are giving someone credit for a losing play, which is effectively blocking a shot that was very difficult, contested, out of bounds, and allowing the offense to reset, with 6 seconds on the shot clock. It's not, the reason. Okay, so let me get back to the main point here. The reason that typically bigs have been considered as the more valuable defender is because they stop the more valuable offensive player, right? For years and years, the concept was you draft a center, you build around it. You get guards, yes, but your guards' primary focus is to get the center of the ball, unless one of your guards or wings are Clyde Drexler, Larry Bird, or Magic Johnson. For the most part, their entire primary offensive role is to find a way to organize the offense so that eventually you can put the ball in the post and the guy can go to work, whether that guy be a Karl Malone, whether that guy be whoever. I think Michael Jordan was really, revolutionary in the sense, because in a league that has often been dominated by the biggest and the biggest, maybe you could make a case that Larry and Magic set the tone for this, and Julius Erving certainly had a part to do with this, and Oscar Robertson and Jerry West. There have been a lot of good guard forwards, but I don't think that this era of wing domination that we have been in Whether the perimeter domination has been pretty much the case. You cannot make a case, I think, apart from maybe 3 to 4 years where you would say Shaq was definitively the best player in the league, and maybe like 1 or 2 years where you can make a case for Dirk. I don't think you could ever make a case for Dirk, to be honest, but Dirk, Tim Duncan, KG, apart from that, like 7 years after Jordan retired, where you can make a case for those guys, I think it's always been a perimeter guy for the last 40 years, 50 years, right? Magic, Bird, Jordan. That was a very long run, right? Which extended 2 decades. Then you had Kobe, T-Mac, James Harden, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Steph Curry, right? And now you can make a very legitimate case that even though your best player is, yes, definitely a big in Nikola Jokic and another big in Giannis Antetokounmpo, but technically they are perimeter players. Even Joel Embiid is a perimeter player. So ultimately, your best players are scoring more and more disproportionately their shots from further from the basket. Giannis lives in the paint. I get that. He doesn't take a lot of jump shots. But apart from him, he is the exception, not the norm. Even Victor Wembanyama right now. So the question then becomes, if you could take 2 defenders from like the 80s or the 70s, you take like a Cindy Moncrief or, even from the 90s, like a Gary Payton, and a big defender that typically didn't rotate well out and just kind of hang back in the paint, a guy like a Dikembe Mutombo, who would give you a better shot to construct? Like, who would you start your defensive all dream team with today? If your goal was to stop a modern offense, which player? So I would start it with Sidney Moncrief or Michael Jordan or Gary Payton or Scottie Pippen. Those are all perimeter defenders. If I couldn't start it with those guys, I'd start it with Bill Russell, because I think that he would be switchable in theory, at least from the tapes that I've watched. I wouldn't start a modern defense with Dikembe Mutombo or Roy Hibbert or Shaq, right? Because I think that's too easy to stop now. I would just put a stretch big, force that player out, and then basically exploit them. So the question then becomes, when increasingly, like if we were to show the data, and certainly we're not going to right now because I didn't pull up the data because I just didn't. I'm sorry. But if we were to look at shot chart data for every single year, I think you'll see more and more and more. I don't think this is the reason you didn't pull up the data is because it's very obviously known that shots are being taken more and more away from the basket. And so the value of a three-pointer, because people have gotten so much better at shooting them. I mean, when you look at league average three-point shooting percentage 20 years ago, it was not this efficient. But now, the more efficient people get from three, the deeper these threes get. Actually, if you want to future-proof your roster, like let's say, and sorry, I'm dancing all over the place. Bear with me. I hope this is making sense. If your goal today is to draft a player that is going to be on your roster 10 years from now, which hopefully is the goal if you have a top 5 pick, and that player is a defensive player, a player like an OG Anunoby, Scottie Barnes, Victor Wembanyama. I'm not saying these guys are all defense. I'm just saying they have that top end potential is the two-way element that they bring to the game, right? You didn't draft Victor Wembanyama to score for you. You drafted him to anchor your offense and defense. So if your goal in the end is to future-proof your roster for the next 10 to 15 years, if you can read the trend line of the way the game is going, increasingly, the player who can most effectively guard a position on the court is less relevant than the player who can guard places on the court and player types. Anthony Edwards types. This is the way the league is going. Donovan Mitchell's, Anthony Edwards, your Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's, your big wings. Yeah, some of those guys are short, but they're big in the sense that they're athletic, they're long, right? So you need guys who match up against that. Just the same way that you needed a Dikembe Mutombo to match up with David Robinson 15 years ago, 25 years ago, and that's what made him valuable then. It's the same reason that an OG Anunoby is the new Dikembe Mutombo. It's not saying that he is exactly like Dikembe Mutombo. It's saying that the value of having a player like a Swiss Army knife on defense, the way that OG Anunoby is, what his capabilities are, the portability of this defender is exactly as relevant today as the paint protection was 20 years ago. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So I plan to do a lot more in my best effort to contribute to the discussion around defense and how we measure defense throughout this year. Last year, obviously, was spent a lot on correcting narratives and fighting, this power and that power. And that got very exhausting very fast. And that's honestly never why I wanted to create a basketball channel. Really, it was to support Scottie, of course, but it was to also contribute to a greater good and hopefully have conversations that are deeper and basketball. And I need to get a lot better to have those conversations at the level I want to have them. But hopefully this is a small start to some deep dive videos that I want to do later throughout this year. I did mention my mortgage renewal is coming in. I was just like, bro, you need to take this channel to the next level from a monetization standpoint if you are going to have a happy Christmas this year. So, okay. Final thing that I want to talk about is the league coverage and how this whole machine works. You'll notice something very interesting about the Toronto Raptors every time they draft. No one knows their pick. And there's two agents, two guys who broker, the favors in this league, and that's Shams and Woj. And they don't seem to know who the Raptors are picking ever. I can't remember the last time they broke it, if they've ever broken it. This is a very tight-lipped front office. There's also a front office that has dealt repeatedly with one front office, which is the San Antonio Spurs. Last 2 deadlines in a row, you dealt with the exact same team. Why? R.C. Buford and Masai Ujiri are possibly on the outs of a circle that is growing increasingly prone to political favor. What I saw happen last year with Fred, right? Like with everything that happened, with how the media storm went after Scottie and vilified everything around him. Really what this was, in my opinion, again, is this is how this entire thing works, right? You sell your soul to the devil in order for some favors. If those guys tweet something about you, if they say you were caught doing this, or your bad locker room presence, or your teammates don't like you, the way this shit spreads on X, the way people retweet it, the way people subreddit it, it's you. That's your career. This is why I fight so hard against Scottie has work ethic issues, that bullshit claim. Because if they want to protect you, David Thorpe saying that will never, ever, ever blow up. They will squash it. I promise you, one call will be made and they will squash it. They would be like, nope, we're not talking about this. There would have been pushback on the show from Will Liu when he said it. There would have been pushback from JD Bunkus when he said it. And they would have been like, how do you know? And he'd be like, oh, I'm just guessing. And then they would have been like, so you don't know. Okay, great. If they liked the guy, they would have done that. But they don't like him. They didn't like him then, so they didn't do that. Instead, they allowed an entire city to believe that this guy has work ethic issues, a guy who absolutely doesn't have work ethic issues. And I promise you, I've talked to people around him and they all think it's nonsense. And I think it's nonsense too. I've watched this guy for a long time. I thought it was nonsense too. And I was just like, who could possibly benefit from Scottie Barnes being a scapegoat for a lost season? Could it be the person who has a massive life-altering contract, who's playing the worst basketball of his life? I wondered if, me going on such a defense tour for Scottie made a difference. Actually, I wonder if Fred playing better made a difference. Because once Fred started playing better, people stopped focusing as much on Scottie Barnes and, his apparent, work ethic issues and not showing up. And so you have to ask the question, if Woj and Shams work on a macro level in this way of, hey, give us information or we dump terrible shit about you and, don't protect your player, won't promote your player. If you screw us over, we'll make sure that players don't even sign with your agency. If they do this on a macro level, then imagine what your beat reporters and your access guys and your local reporters do on a micro level to protect certain players and certain executives. Don't think that it changes what you say about a person when you get to meet them. I've met a couple of players. Believe me, it does change how you feel about them. It changes how you view them. There is a human perspective and a human bias in this, where when you deal with a person on a day-to-day basis, when you have DM chains with them, it's really difficult to get on a show and be like, they were trash today, they need to be better. You somehow cover it with like kid gloves because you don't want to lose access, because the whole thing is about access, right? And so if this business is built on access and gates to access, and your access is basically determined by what you're going to write, well, then you don't really have freedom of press. Now the question is then, if Masai Ujiri has decided he's not going to play ball with this Woj and Shams breaking all of the trades and rumors around the Raptors, does it now suddenly make a lot of sense to you why OG Anunoby is always in trade rumors? Does it ever make sense to you why Pascal Siakam's coverage around the league is always kind of like negative? Like there's like he's kind of like a fake star. He's not real. Like I didn't start this. This has been around forever. Do you think maybe that this entire Scottie Barnes is kind of like overrated, and he's slumped in his second year, he has work ethic issues? You think this entire narrative might have been different if the whole thing was about Cade? Cade missed most of his first two seasons, and one could make a very reasonable case, not that I would make one, that it was because he was not in condition and therefore he got hurt. You could blame him for his injury. If you didn't like the guy, you could make that case. You could start calling him a bust. I haven't heard one person call Cade Cunningham a bust. Why? Is it possible that the people that are at the top of the chains of command at ESPN and all of these media companies have favorable relations with people like Troy Weaver and the multi-billion-dollar people who own these teams, who have a vested interest in their fans believing that Cade Cunningham is going to be a superstar and that he has no issues at all? This is my point here, right? See, you have to. I think the only way to combat this is to just always try to tell the truth, And I had a long discussion with my cousin about this yesterday, and he's leaning very heavily into Buddhism. And he says, most people find it really difficult to tell the truth at all times. And that's very true. Even people who think that they're remarkably honest can definitely, subconsciously or even consciously, when put into a corner, lie about something. So I think that and honestly, the other thing I'll tell you with is I wanted to tie this up on something that is a little bit more universally relevant, and hopefully something that can inspire you to action as well, and something that I'm not here to teach you anything about life, but I do want to communicate something that I think is very important to know. It is very difficult to take an unpopular opinion about something. It is not at all, by the way, difficult to just go with the herd on everything. So if everyone likes a player, you're like, oh, I like this player. That's not difficult. Going with the herd is never difficult. Standing apart is difficult, and it is sometimes painful, and people don't like you for it. They really don't like you for it. If you have a different opinion than 30 other people and you're in a room of 31 people, people will move away from you if your opinion pisses them off, because it challenges their opinion and it challenges their superiority, because why are you standing apart? So it's difficult to do that. You know what else is also easy, but the other thing is really hard? It's really easy to hate people. It's really easy to hate players. It's really easy to hate content creators. It's really easy for me to hate, a particular media person that I don't like Doug Smith, who I've definitely not talked very nicely about it ever on this show. It's very easy to hate JD Bunkus for his irresponsibility. But, the more I'm 35 years old and trying to mature as a human being, I'm trying to get better. The more I reflect on moments of hatred in my life where I resented a person, no matter how I justified hating that person, no matter how I justified what they did to me or whatever, ultimately the end result was I suffer. It's impossible for me to hate somebody and not lead myself down a path of more suffering. And so, more importantly than anything, I am trying to find a way to balance being honest without being spiteful, vengeful, and really trying not trying to be better than anybody. I'm just not trying to become exactly what I'm criticizing. Because how different is it, right? Like they did it to Fred. They did it for Fred. They protect Fred. He's having a tough season, so they make excuses for him. They blame everybody else. Well, didn't I do the same thing for Scottie to some extent, right? Now, you might agree with me and you say, well, Fred was the bad guy and Scottie was a good guy, but this good guy, bad guy thing is never the case, right? Fred wasn't a bad guy. Scottie's not a good guy. They're all just good guys. They're all trying their best. They're all, there's no bad guy, good guy here. It's really difficult to judge someone unless you're in their shoes. We don't know what Fred VanVleet goes through. We don't know what was said to him. We don't know what his relationship was like with Scottie. We don't know if he loves Scottie. They follow each other again, by the way. It couldn't have been that bad. It's not like he did something so egregious to him. It was just a play style thing, And of course, it feels hard in that moment because, what is happening to your favorite player is not fair. The entire media is going off on him and it's not fair. And you can see kind of like who they're protecting and why they're doing it. And you're not seeing this player who's supposed to be his older teammate standing up for him. And you're just like, this is the bad guy. The truth is that I am trying to start this season out, both in my interactions with callers and also my interactions in the chats. I'm going to try my best to be one who tries to see positive intent. Okay. Like I'm going to assume that, if someone disagrees with me in a really harsh way, that maybe they didn't intend to be harsh, but rather that's just the way they communicate. Because I sometimes communicate in a way that can be very blunt, that people think is rude. I'm not trying to be rude. It's just the way it is. I think this world can be a better place, personally, if we assume positive intent and that we try to steer away from hate and try to go towards empathy. Because it's hard to be empathetic towards someone who evokes such a strong emotion of disdain. And because it is hard, it is the path worth going on. I think most things in life that are worth having are hard. It's hard to become an NBA player. Why? Because it takes a lot of work, commitment, discipline. That's why most people won't make it. That's why there's a lot of talented people out there who could have made it. They didn't make it, right? That's just a fact. So let's do the hard thing. And, I saw a lot of tweets about Fred VanVleet's opening night and the Houston Rockets getting blown out by the Magic and how Dennis Schroeder is a better player than him and this and that and whatever. And it's just like, bro, like Nick Nurse lost his first game. Oh, that's hate, right? What does it matter to us if the Houston Rockets lost or if Fred VanVleet shot poorly or whatever? I get it. It's part of the fan experience to root against guys who left. But at this point, I tweeted it out. We wanted him to leave. He left. What more is there? We should be over this. I know it's hard. I know we went through a lot as a fan base. We watched some of the ugliest basketball, but we're not watching it anymore. He left. And you know what's funny? He did us the biggest favor in the world. He left. He allowed us the money to sign Jakob. He allowed us the money to sign Dennis Schroeder. He didn't delay his decision for like 7 days. He still, made that decision when guys like Schroeder were still on the market, which helps, and who knows, if he holds up his decision longer, you might lose Jakob. Like, we don't know. Like, you could have lost Jakob and not had Schroeder. Like, you imagine where this team would be. Plus, he could have also signed. He could have chosen not to go back. He could have been like, fuck all the fans who dislike me. I'm going to come back and spite them. And then we'd be watching, another year of slow basketball. Something that stuck out in the first game, the Raptors were the fastest team in the league. Well, one of the fastest teams in the league. And they had the most fast break points in the league. And that was their saving grace on opening night. You put Fred VanVleet in place of Dennis Schroeder, you probably lose that game because he probably shoots worse than Dennis Schroeder and he probably defends worse than Dennis Schroeder. And he definitely doesn't allow the pace to run the way Dennis Schroeder did. So I'm not going to make the argument that Dennis is better than Fred or Fred is better than Dennis. It doesn't even matter at this point. Who cares? Neither one of these guys are top 10 point guards. You're really comparing role players at this point. Just one of them happens to think he is a role player and the other one thinks he's, Damian Lillard. So he's gone. We can move on. I think that we can be a place of, having difficult conversations in a healthy way. We can still talk about, players who are not performing well. We can definitely still talk about, things that need to change with the lineup. It's funny. I saw a quote from Nick Nurse saying that the difference between Philly fans and Toronto fans is Toronto fans would be like, yo, Nurse, what's up? And Philly fans are like, yo, you got to do this and this and this, and they're coaching him. And I'm like, bro, like you never met me, because I have met a couple of coaches, like assistant coaches way back when, and I would fully, like, even when I was a teenager or like in early 20s, I'd be like, no, you guys need to try this lineup and this lineup will work. So I mean, I guess the freaking thing is out. I'm like a Philly fan because I'm from New York, and that's just how we, I guess, I don't know. Maybe that's the difference. Anyways, um, exactly. It doesn't matter who's better. Exactly. Want to see some Javon Freeman Liberty on those Bulls guards off the bench. I would love to see Javon. All right, to the final question, which I believe was brought up by someone earlier, and I promised I would answer it, and I'm really happy that I remembered one of these things because typically I forget, was why did Boucher not play? So I think this is going to be a tale of two seasons, right? I'm a little bit surprised Grady's not getting more minutes right now. Maybe that's evidenced by the fact that his analytics say he was the worst player on the court, that Flynn was the second worst player on the court, but for his 2 minutes that he played, he was disastrous. Now I can't remember off top of my head if he shared those 2 minutes with Malachi Flynn, because I think that might explain it. But yes, he and Malachi were definitely worst players on opening night. Dennis, Jakob, and OG were your best players on opening night. Again, according to most advanced stats, I think Scottie was in that first camp. Personally, for me, I think he just shot poorly. Pascal Siakam has a PER of 9 right now. He really was in the bottom half of your roster in terms of contribution to winning for a player who played that well. For a player who played that much, I wonder if the goal right now is for guys like Siakam, Boucher, and Otto and Thad to ramp up for the second half of the season, because the way the Raptors play certainly lends into the way Otto and Boucher play. Like, there's no reason to not play those guys in this system. And I wonder if this is just one of the things where, okay, let's give Malachi a shot. Let's give Grady a shot. Let's give Jalen McDaniels a shot. Let's give all these guys a shot. But if you're asking me point blank, Jalen McDaniels, Otto Porter, who's helping you win more today? It's definitely Otto. But who's helping you win more 3-4 years from now in your program? Probably Jalen McDaniels. So maybe this is a chance to see if one of these guys really is that guy, because young players often struggle with consistency, IQ, decision making, lots of things that cost you. The second thing that I think this is a really good idea for this team is teams are not the same in the first half of the season versus the second half of the season, because they become more adjusted and scouting reports become deeper and more complex. And there are certain, players that you figure out their tendencies. And that is when, your more experienced players who can read the game a little bit better, make fewer mistakes and give up fewer breaks and all this stuff. I think they have a greater vested interest. They have a greater chance of success later in the season than earlier in the season, when everyone is just running on adrenaline. Because by the end of the season, even your young spring chickens have played 80 games, 60 games, and they're tired too. The game, it's not necessarily that it slows down, but I do believe that a player like Otto will help you more in January, February than he will in November, December. I think this is an exact concept. I think I've talked to someone about baseball as well, and it's the inverse. So it definitely has to be talked about beforehand with Darko to say, hey, like, we don't know where we're going to be at the trade deadline. These are young assets. You guys are not going anywhere. We like you, Chris, Otto, whoever. You're part of our team, but these young guys, we need to see what we have in them, and if we can trust them. And if they have taken a pop, maybe you're dealt at the trade deadline. And if they haven't taken a pop, then you're going to get their rotation spot, and they're going to sit behind you and work till next year. And that just might be the goal. I mean, you've seen it a lot to start the year with even Nick Nurse, that Malachi Flynn, Delano Banton have gotten a lot of minutes. And by the end of the year, the rotation shortens, and he's leaning more on the vets. So it happens every year. I expect guys like Otto, Thad, Pascal to ramp up. And also, if you know that this is going to happen, if you're a veteran, right, then typically you want to take the off season to just recover, and you work yourself into shape as you're playing, and you ramp up to be ready for like major minutes and major push in January or December. I think the midseason tournament might change a couple of things on that. Jury is still out how much teams are actually going to invest or care about this midseason tournament, but it'll be interesting to see that. But I do think that there's every single year there's like a young team that comes out to 10-2, and everyone's like, they're going to be great. And maybe this year it'll be the Orlando Magic or the New Orleans Pelicans or even the Toronto Raptors, like, that just start out super, super on fire because other teams don't have a report on them. They're running super fast. They're incredible defensively, et cetera, et cetera. And then, once the scouting report is out, I think last year, the Wizards, right, with Bradley Beal, they were top 6 in the New Orleans Pelicans, I think like 2-3 weeks into the season were the number 1 seed, right? So it happens every single year. There's a team that kind of catches people off. And granted, that was largely due to the fact that Zion was healthy and then Zion was not healthy. I think we all remember the game against the Raptors where he dunked on the entire team by himself. They're a different team with him. Anyways, I am looking forward to more NBA action tonight. Can't wait to face the Chicago Bulls. Can't wait to watch Scottie flex on Alex Caruso, dunk all over, DeRozan, Levine, and I don't know. I think it'd be really funny. I hope he doesn't do it, but I think it'd be really funny if DR DeRozan is there, and he just goes over and like gives waves at her, like really cute like wave, like as here's my dream scenario for tonight. I'm going to share this dream scenario with you. The Raptors are up by 30 points. They're blowing the Bulls out. The Bulls are getting booed. DeAr DeRozan is crying or really sad on like because her dad is like, I don't know, not getting the money that he wants in the contract negotiation, and her team is losing, and she's there and she's not screaming, and Scottie just goes up to her and he just does this, and then he gives her some popcorn or something. I think that would be like, if I was Scottie's PR rep, I would literally I'd risk a fine to do this in the middle of the game just for the vibes of it, man. I don't know. I think it'd be funny. Anyways, look, I expect a big game from Scottie Barnes. I think they're going to win, but the Bulls did have a team meeting, and you never know how these team meetings go, right? But it's always a good sign when guys really hash it out after a tough loss. And you never know what happens in these team meetings. But DeMar strikes me, and Vucevic strikes me, and a lot of guys, Alex Caruso in that locker room, strike me as the types of guys who, if they had a team meeting and they were there, it was probably a very productive and positive team meeting. So the Raptors will have their work cut out for them tonight, but I expect to win. I will see you guys at 10:30 or 11 o'clock for the post-game live. Make sure to hit like, make sure to hit subscribe on your way out. I really appreciate it. And yes, I will return within a week. I will return to making shorter videos that have more juicy, edits and stuff like that. Don't ask me why I've been so lazy about it. I was working on my feature all summer or most of the summer. And then I promised myself, like, the minute I was done, I was just going to, focus on Pantera basketball, focus on Penn Dance for the next 6 months. And I wasn't going to think about film. And then I got booked onto that film. And it was just such a negative experience that I feel like I've been processing it for like 2-3 weeks now. And there's just been a lot of stuff that's been happening, in my life personally, that's just been clouding my brain and not giving me a ton of energy to do shit. But it is my duty to do this stuff. You guys have obviously subscribed because you expect, good content, and it can't just all be lives, right? It has to be those short stuff that you guys initially signed up for. So I will get on that, and hopefully it'll be better than ever. All right. Talk to you later. Peace. Have a good one.